Welcome to Making the Cut podcast with Chris Hill and Sean Winter, where we help you succeed in life and business by sharing principles and strategies that guide some of the most successful people in the world.
Welcome to another episode of the Making the Cut podcast. I'm Chris Hill with my co-host Sean Winter. Today on the show we have Erik Oberholtzer, co-founder and CEO of the rapidly growing restaurant group Tender Greens. But before we hop into that conversation with him, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
Libby salutes one-of-a-kinds like you, the entrepreneurial chefs who dare to be bold. No matter what vision you're creating, Libby has the full-spectrum tableware selection, trend knowledge, and expertise to help you bring it to life. Modern or classic, upscale or casual, urban or rustic, Libby's broad palette helps you create the perfect vibe to match any venue. Get inspired with Libby's breadth of insights-driven solutions at foodservice.libby.com. Becoming a restaurateur not only requires passion for food, but a keen business sense. Enhance your culinary training and management capabilities with Le Cordon Bleu's world-class programs. Learn all the necessary skills to successfully launch a business and become a leader in the hospitality and restaurant industry. Learn more at cordonbleu.edu/USA. And with that, I read something very interesting about Erik and the company. I read that they're on track to generate over $100 million in annual revenue for the first time this year, which is absolutely insane. I'm sure he's going to have some pretty incredible insights about life and business and strategy and all these things. I'm very excited to connect with him today.
Absolutely, man. That's pretty impressive. I think they're right around year 15. They're up around 30 restaurants or so. I'm excited. Let's just jump right in. What do you say?
Absolutely.
Hey there, Erik. How's it going today?
Awesome. How you doing?
Doing great. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a real honor to have you here. Maybe you could tell the audience a bit about your background, your story, and kind of how you've gotten here so far.
So I'm a chef by background, spent many of my years in the kitchen in San Francisco through the 90s, and then moved to Los Angeles to run Shutters on the Beach, which is a little luxury hotel right on the beach in Santa Monica. And it was there that I met my two partners, Matt Lyman and David Dressler. And we sort of incubated the idea of Tender Greens with a simple mission of democratizing good food, finding the space between luxury dining that was centered on the 1% that we had always serviced in our careers, and then this fast food landscape in Southern California that was scalable, accessible, but didn't really answer our food or lifestyle needs or philosophies. So what we did with Tender Greens was take everything that we could from our past in slow food and luxury hospitality, peel away all the unnecessary things that create a lot of cost, and then borrow some efficiencies from fast food in terms of order service and throughput and scalability, simplicity, without ever compromising the integrity of the raw ingredient or the thoughtfulness of cooking under the watchful eye of a chef. And every one of our restaurants has a fine dining chef, trained chef. So we've always sort of led with that chef talent.
I love it, Erik. And so, a lot of people struggle after they get an idea. You said you incubated the idea with your now partners. A lot of people struggle with getting started and some of those obstacles that present themselves when they get started. So I'm curious for you, what was the hardest part about bringing this idea to fruition, and how did you all overcome this?
Yeah, the easy part is coming up with the idea. The hardest part for us was raising capital. When you have an idea, a little bit of industry credibility, restaurants inherently are risky. Any startup is risky, but restaurants are particularly risky. And raising the money took a lot of time, but it also gave us time to refine, our business plan, really think through every detail, and convince those who would listen that this was a dream worth putting a little bit of money behind. So it took about 3 years for us to raise the $900,000 necessary to sign a lease and open our first restaurant.
And just real quick as a follow-up, I'm curious, what was that catalyst that helped you get to that amount, approaching that 3 years? Like what was the thing that tipped the scales that then that investor or group or whoever it was that said absolutely yes?
Yeah, it was a good question. We were friends and family kind of put in their $10,000 and $25,000 pretty quickly. And then as we got outside of the friends and family and people who really looked at us critically, it sort of stalled a bit. And it all came down to a very lonely conversation that David and I had at this dingy bar in Santa Monica, where by that time we were feeling the strains of trying to raise capital. Matt and I were still at Shutters on the Beach. David had already left and was working as a waiter at Peninsula Hotel just to make money and focus on raising capital, thinking it would only be a summer. It ended up being two years. And we were, our wives were starting to look at us cross-eyed, and we were starting to ask ourselves if this would ever happen. So David and I sat down and had the heart to heart, and it was really a discussion around, do we keep going or do we pull the plug and go back to our old careers? And the one button to still press was his father-in-law. His father-in-law had some resources, but David was really cautious about asking. He didn't want to blend family and money. And I was able to convince him to ask that I would lead the pitch and I would shield him from any weirdness related to a business investment and family. And we went down to San Diego and did our pitch, and he wrote the check that got us over the hump and onto the glory land. And 10 years later, we were able to write a much bigger check back to him. So it all turned out really well in the end.
Love that. I've heard you talk about the 3 whys. Maybe you could touch on that for us.
Well, yeah. At the time, David and I were both married, no kids. Matt was dating his now wife. We're all the same age. We were all pretty much from the same pedigree, and we were at that unique phase of life where our wives were supportive and cheering us on. We were young enough to fail and sort of get back up, but old enough to have learned something. And our wives were supportive in the sense that they understood what TYT meant, which is the name of our company, and what it stands for is 10-year plan. That this was not going to be a sort of get-rich, glamorous project, at least not quickly. And they were going to have to both roll up their sleeves and help out, which they did, and then also sort of support the process, which meant some really lean years, stressful years, and any entrepreneur listening will understand what that is. Just because it looks like you're running a successful enterprise that's growing doesn't mean the household is doing well, because everything goes back into the business and you're married to the business. So our wives, who are committed to us, knew that they were also married to the business. And, it was important. It was important to have that support behind us.
And so what would you say was one of the hardest parts about balancing that family life and business growth early on? And a quick follow-up would be, how did you strike that balance? How'd you overcome that? Because I'm sure it was extremely hard.
Yeah, and then a couple levels for us. It was all hands on deck. My mom was working the door. My brother was coming in for busy lunches. My wife and David's wife were coming in to work the cash register, and then once we sort of settled into the business, it became clear that it was important to keep family, sort of personal and business, so as not to confuse the staff and muddy the water and create, sort of what can be too much of a family-run business, because we weren't building a family-run business. We were building a company. And I think the learning was just, be very clear on what sort of culture you're creating. And if you're going to create this sort of family culture, this family business, truly family business, then that's going to feel different than if you're building a brand that creates its own family, but is slightly separate from your personal life. And we chose early on to keep the two separate, so as not to create any tension both at Tender Greens or with the three partners and sort of the complexity of our individual personal commitments.
I know most chefs, myself included, the goal is to own your own restaurant. Sometimes that's one, sometimes that's a handful. Did you ever imagine that it would be, around 30 locations?
29.
Could you have ever imagined scaling to that point? Was the goal to scale, or was it we just want to open up one and kind of see where it goes?
Yeah, this is where I always feel the truth is, and I don't want to come off as sort of overconfident or arrogant, but the truth is TYP, which, as I said, stands for 10-year plan, was very clear. It was 10 years, 3 founders, growing the company to 30 locations in California. We didn't make it to 30 in 10 years, but we blew our AUVs or our volumes out of the water. So we ended up performing much better than we anticipated. And it was set up to scale from the very beginning. And the reason for that was as chefs, I had seen a lot of my mentors age out much in the same way that an athlete or even an actor reaches their prime and then begins to fade. And chefs do the same. It's a young person's game, and there are very few people who can be on their feet working weekends and holidays their entire lives. And none of us really wanted to do that. We didn't see that for ourselves. So we wanted to create a brand that was scalable, that we could create real value and wealth, and the value and wealth was in the brand, not our names on the marquees. So Tender Greens was designed as a scalable concept, also as a means to bring good food, real food, whole food to as many neighborhoods as possible, that it wasn't a boutique idea, that it was an idea that in scale could be more influential and a stronger agent of change. So yes, from the day I wrote the menu, it was designed as a scalable concept.
And I'm curious, when you say that it was set up to scale from the very beginning, just so that people can understand, can you give a little peek behind the curtain or a little insight as to what do you mean by that? Was it certain processes that you had in place? Like, what does it mean on a granular level for you to set up to scale in the very beginning?
Well, as I said in the beginning, we borrowed from fine dining and slow food, which is often not scalable, and fast food efficiency, scalability systems, and sort of blended the two. So where it was set up to scale was by simplifying the menu, keeping the value proposition, the price point accessible so that as many people as possible could participate in Tender Greens on a regular basis, that it was familiar. It wasn't food that was unfamiliar to people. It was just the best version of food that people already knew and loved and craved on a daily basis. And then, a book that we each read was The E-Myth. And I think it's the most important business book I've ever read. It's also the shortest read. It's the one I recommend the most. And the magic in that book is that, you go in with a plan to pull yourself out of the operation so that you run the business versus working in the business. And all along that journey of scaling a business and growing a business and adding complexity, you have a plan all along the way to replace yourself. And at first, we replaced ourselves with the night cleaners, and then the dishwashers, and then the prep cooks, and then the cashiers, and along that journey is you need to have the discipline to pull yourself out of the weeds at the appropriate time, not too early, not too late, but at the appropriate time. And that can be an emotional journey, because all of us, and I talk to young entrepreneurs all the time, and myself included, want to be in the weeds. We want to be in the mix. We want to feel as though we're doing something, that we're adding value. But more and more, as you grow, the value add is at 30,000 feet.
Absolutely. And yeah, great book, the E-Myth. And I think at a certain point you realize that you can provide more value to the organization by stepping back and letting the other folks run it. One thing that I can't even imagine the challenges y'all might have had, I assume you figured it out because y'all are doing so well, but having a classically trained executive chef at every single restaurant that has creative freedom, using local ingredients. Talk me through how y'all were able to scale that and make that work.
So because we came out of fine dining as chefs, we understand inherently what motivates a chef. And foundationally, a chef is a creative. A chef is someone who needs to work with food, to express themselves with food. So we need to give them that room to be expressive. So that whether it's through the specials, through unique relationships with farmers and artisans at the local level, it keeps their creative juices flowing so that they can also protect some of the standards and the classics on the menu that require the chef's attention to detail to make sure the roasted chicken is perfectly roasted and everything's seasoned properly. Also, what we have that a lot of others don't in fine dining or other places is career growth. As I said, I believe chefs are much like athletes. So we get these chefs who are already successful chefs. They're great cooks, but they're not entrepreneurs. They're not necessarily schooled in finance, and they don't understand how to run a business. And that's why so many talented chefs go out and they fail. So what we give our chefs is an opportunity to become entrepreneurs, whether they're running one or many of our restaurants and growing with us. And we give all of our executive chefs equity, so they have a fraction of that of the action, or they develop the business acumen to go out and pursue their own thing, which we've had folks do as well. But either way, we create this entrepreneurial environment that, if their previous jobs were chef incubators, let's say, talent incubators, we are chef entrepreneur incubators. So we prepare chefs to run businesses and to be successful at business without losing or compromising what got them into this business in the first place, which is a passion for food.
I love that. It's incredible. I'm curious, was there a turning point throughout this journey? I'm sure there was, but whether it was a year in, 3 years in, 5 years in, what was that inflection point, that turning point that then things started to either rapidly grow or change positively? Was there a period like that, and what contributed to it?
We were really fortunate out of the gates that Culver City was incredibly successal. We were a novelty. There was nothing really like Tender Greens at the time. So we became this, region-wide destination. And then, we had a little bit of overconfidence. We opened in San Diego, which in retrospect didn't make a lot of sense, but we did. And, that restaurant's very successful. But I would say where it really started to to move was the summer where we opened our 5th, 6th, and 7th restaurant. So it was Walnut Creek, Pasadena, and Santa Monica. And it was at that point that I stepped back a little bit from the day-to-day, like in the kitchen, pulling shifts to, sort of overseeing and supporting the restaurant teams without being the guy who got the sick calls and when the chicken didn't show up, I had to deal with it. And then also we started to put systems in place so that it wasn't salt and pepper to taste and the mood of the chef, but everything had an SOP. We started to develop a more robust training program. We came up with, me, Matt, and David worked with a facilitator to come up with what we call Base Camp, which are sort of our guiding principles, mission statement, that sort of thing. But it was those bullet points that informed every decision, so that as we were pulled further and further away from the team, at least we would have everything memorialized from company philosophy as it, in our words, but very clear. And then the SOPs, so that it wasn't, well, this guy told me to do it this way, or when I do it, I do it like this. There were certain things that were non-negotiable, and that helped us to scale.
With new restaurant openings, I know y'all have expanded over the East Coast now, which is awesome. Is most of bringing in a new chef to run the new store, is that primarily done elevating a sous chef to executive chef of the store, or how's that working? Yeah,
we have a succession plan. So in the early days, we recruited pretty heavily out of my network, guys who had worked for me in San Francisco or LA, and saw what we were doing and said, when you have room, I want to join. So they became our original executive chefs. And then, later on, they were moved to regionals. For the East Coast openings, we've tapped 2 senior guys, both of whom have opened and run successful restaurants for us in California. Peter Ballesteri, who's running New York, has worked with us for 10 years, and he's opened 2 really, really successful and top-performing restaurants in San Diego. And then Todd Renner, who has done the same up in San Francisco, is running Boston. And their journey is not just to run one restaurant, but then to grow out those regions. So Todd will really lead the team and the culture in Boston, while Peter will lead the team and the culture here in New York City. And I'm here in New York to support both of them with heavy support in New York, just because it's such a big market.
Now I'm curious, Erik, as things were growing, I'm sure, as CEO, leadership becomes just even more and more and more important. So what's your either personal leadership philosophy, or what type of leader are you, and how do you ensure that you have a really good culture of leadership in the company now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I think we all look to our mentors as models. I would call it compassionate or heartfelt leadership, meaning, I sort of lead with empathy and the spirit of everybody has a superpower, everybody brings value, and everybody is equally valuable, from, our newest dishwasher onto, the CEO. And sometimes the dishwasher is more important, in reality. And then, I think that cascades down through the organization, that we are a thoughtful, compassionate, oftentimes very vulnerable organization where it's safe to share and safe to fail and learn from those failures, just not chronically. And then we're clear. We're clear on, what we stand for and who we are and what that sounds like, what that feels like, what that tastes like. And if you get it right, you don't really have to manage it too tightly. You hire the right people and you let them live it. You let them do their thing. And from time to time, you might need to bring people to center. Oftentimes when we bring folks in from the outside, they may come from a more intense environment where things are done differently, and everything's on metrics and results and blah, blah, blah. And that can, that stuff's important, but it all needs to be done with holistic sensitivity, meaning we are not a zero-sum game organization. We look to make sure that the needs of everybody are balanced, not just our team or our shareholders or the guests, but also the farmers or the guy who picks up the dirty linen every morning. Everybody needs to have a positive interaction with Tender Greens. And as long as we're living those values and we're driving the results that we need, we're executing best in class, and people are happy, both internally and externally, then it runs. It's in conflict or crisis that, that's where you really need to be strong and keep to your convictions, because whether it's a financial issue or something else, your core values can be threatened in the face of adversity. So that's where you're really tested. It's not, the testing doesn't come in good days on the beach. The testing comes in sort of rainy, miserable days when you might be feeling a little low.
And I know you have a close relationship with Danny Meyer and Union Square Hospitality Group. Would you say that you're kind of the Danny Meyer for Tender Greens?
Well, I think it's I suppose so. Though I wouldn't be so bold to put myself on Danny's level. I mean, Danny's just next level, but he's become a friend and a mentor, and sort of an aspirational leader for me. He's if I can model off of Danny, then I'll be pretty satisfied with how I show up in the world. He's the best. He's one of the best in the world. So yes, I look to Danny as the best version of myself, imagined self. That's always a journey, and it has to be authentic and true to who I am. I can't replicate, but I can certainly model his elegance and his leadership style, the way he shows up. He always takes the high road, and that's really impressive. I mean, Danny just sort of blows me away, and how he presents, and I've seen it not just publicly, but how he is, with his team. And even yesterday, I was sitting on the steps of Lincoln Center at the welcome conference, and I was having lunch with Danny, and somebody was really congested. Somebody didn't really step on him, but sort of bumped him, and she excused herself, and Danny just elegantly said, "Oh, well, good to meet you. I'm Danny." And turned it into an opportunity to just be pleasant. Most people might have just said, don't worry about it. But he actually turned it into a greeting. And it's those little things that Danny does that are impressive, and they matter when you start to build those moments in a chain, because people notice it and they feel it.
And as you build these moments, have you always kind of had this sense of clarity, or has it been an evolution since the early days?
Well, I think we're always, as lifelong learners, we're always learning and evolving and refining, and hopefully doubling down or emphasizing what works. And as a lifelong meditator and somebody who shows up with a certain degree of balance and calm, my team seems to appreciate. I've sort of used that to create a more calm, compassionate, empathetic, thoughtful organization.
And I'm curious on that last point, when things are maybe a little tense or stressful for your team or the company at large, is it that calmness and that clarity during those times that you believe help guide your team, or are there other things that you do from a leadership standpoint that help guide through stress or tension that may arise?
Yeah, I think there are those who react to things as a 5-alarm fire, and that leadership style can create a lot of action, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. And I'm not saying that that's not effective. It can be, and in the kitchens, classically, that was the chef who's freaking out and throwing plates and being a drama queen. But is sitting on 3 Michelin stars. So you can get results that way. It's just never been my style. So, I sort of call it relationship Tai Chi. The more, let's say, negative energy that is thrown at the team or thrown at me, the more we just sort of slow it down, and ask the right questions, keep our heads. So while there's chaos in the marketplace, or there's chaos in the office because everybody's freaking out about something, we sort of redirect that energy, keep our clarity, and figure out, the best step forward. And I think if you keep your head, you keep everybody calm, then, their heads are clear, and we can work through it. Now, the risk on that end is opposite of the example I gave with destroying plates and drama queen. You can be almost too calm, that everybody relaxes and doesn't understand how serious, the situation is. So, it is a balance. You don't want to sit too far in one extreme or the other. And sometimes the intensity is necessary. But for me, intensity with, a sort of a foundation of calm and clarity is the most important.
I was doing a Facebook Live recently, and a question someone was asking me, and I really relate to it because I think very similar to you in trying to keep things even keeled, and also very empathetic and try to understand people and give people the benefit of the doubt. But sometimes I can kind of come back to bite you in the ass. So I'm curious, have you ever maybe seen yourself as that maybe almost like a double-edged sword for yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I think that, Danny and I have talked about this because he has the same thing sometimes, is that, when you lead with empathy and compassion and a belief that everybody has something to offer, you might take too much time to make a hard decision, which sometimes, a player has to come off the field or be traded to another team or even sent down to the minors. And if you're that leader who is, moving that player to all 9 positions before taking them off the field, you may end up losing some games. So I think it's important to be able to identify when some of those harder decisions need to be made and make them, versus trying to save everyone. And that's been something that I've, it's taken me a long time to get used to, because I sort of, you become connected to people. They become family, and that might be your team, that might be a farmer. And, as you grow, sometimes the people who got you to a certain point aren't the people who are going to get you to the next point. So those decisions, they never become easier, but, you sort of get better at it, I suppose, but it doesn't make it any easier.
It's still very difficult. I know the feeling, looking someone in the eye when you had all the faith in the world and you tried as hard as you can and you just have to cut ties. It can be a little gut-wrenching sometimes.
Yeah.
So the last question for me, it's a little left field. It's very, very loaded. But for some of the entrepreneurial and business-minded individuals that are listening to this and they look at you and they look at the success, I mean, we're talking about to cross over to $100 million company in this time frame, which is just absolutely incredible, and done so with empathy and intention. And I just love it. So off the top of your head, from an advice standpoint, how does someone get to a $100 million company?
You surround yourself with smarter people than you. It's all about, it started with me and Matt and David, really good partners that sort of balanced each other. And all along the way, we added talented people who were aligned with our mission and principles. We gave them the room to succeed. And like I said, sometimes we gave them too much room or leeway, and we had to learn from that. But at the end of the day, it's you have to put the right team together at the right stage. And just like in sports again, last year's Super Bowl champion may be this year's youngest team, right? Sometimes you have to rebuild for the next season or the next journey. So I think it's that. I think follow the guidelines of the E-Myth, so that you're not in the weeds working in your business, but you're always working on your business. And in that spirit of surrounding yourself with really smart people, have mentors along the way. We say that, there's this constant chain of learning and teaching, that everybody in the organization has an arm pointed upwards towards somebody who's smarter and wiser and can see around the corner for them. And then an arm back that says, here, I'll help you to the next stage because I can see it ahead. And I think if you can do that in an organization and that chain grows and there's this commitment to learning and that comes from the top, then you have a chance. And then it's timing, it's luck, it's the ability to navigate what is now an incredibly dynamic, disruptive world that changes a lot faster than what we're historically accustomed to. So, you have to stay on your toes and you have to stay nimble. And so the bigger you get, the harder that is. So, don't relax on your lead and never become arrogant.
One final question for me. That's great stuff. You talked about the TYP, the 10-year plan. There can now be a TYP times 2 or 3 being the 20-year, 30-year plan. I'm curious, I know you guys do a lot with giving back and creating programs for mentorship. How do you see the next kind of chapter playing out for you guys?
Well, we'll continue to grow. By 2020, we'll be at about 54 restaurants. We'll legitimately be a national brand. So more people are going to have the opportunity to enjoy Tender Greens. And with that, with the growth, the scale, we have a bigger voice. We have a broader range and more influence on all levels, whether it's supply chain integrity, community engagement, our voice and perspective as it relates to food's, role in the world. And, we'll continue, and this is a lot of what I do these days, is we'll continue to advocate for, the supply chain that we believe in, that we need to scale up. We're going to advocate more and more for, plant forward menu design, not exclusive, but plant forward. So food is medicine, and as a daily performance enhancing part of your life. And then also changing America's relationship with food from what I think has often been the source of anxiety and depression and negativity and sickness, to something that is restorative, is curing, is enjoyable, and is an important part of their community, their family, their life. And obviously we don't do that alone, but it's in bonding with other like-minded chefs and brands and farmers and others, to really use food as a positive force in our society.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Erik. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
So that was our conversation with Erik Oberholtzer. Sean, what were your takeaways, buddy?
There was a lot of things to take away from him. It was a great conversation. There was 2 in particular. I think the insight to them raising money early on and it taking 3 years and them almost giving up in so many words and doing a Hail Mary at the end to be able to raise money. I thought that was very interesting. And then number 2 was having an environment where employees can fail, they can learn from it, just not chronically, as he said. I think that's very important. As business owners or entrepreneurs, if we do have direct reports, sometimes when a direct report or employee makes a mistake, it's very hard and it can be very traumatizing to the business or the owner, but you have to understand that that moment is an investment in that employee's future if you allow them to learn from it. So I think that's a very important point. So I really loved those 2 things. What about you?
Absolutely, man. I think the first point you touched on, with hearing the struggles to make it happen, it sounds like it was pretty close to maybe not happening at all. And I think for folks listening that are, trying to make that startup business restaurant company off the ground, I think it's reassuring and nice to hear that, hey, we all have struggles trying to make our dreams happen. The other thing for me, I think, is hearing his compassion and his empathy for the people around him, specifically his employees. I've always tried to come from that place, but at the same time, in the heat of the moment, it's kind of hard and challenging. But if you can just kind of maintain that perspective and know that I'm the person in charge, I kind of set the tone here. And when everyone else is kind of freaking out, if I can maintain this level head, then we're going to get through this. And it's up to me to kind of keep the boat afloat, so to speak. And to kind of close things out, I have a great quote that kind of ties right into that from Erik himself, where he says, "Lead with empathy and the spirit that everybody has a superpower and that everyone is equally valuable." And with that, we're signing off.
Yeah.